Yes, I know it's irresistible. It's Sunday morning. Whatever you're doing, that music means that it's Sunday sermon time. And yes, I was racking my brains thinking about what would be an appropriate Sunday sermon this morning. And I want you to imagine you're a bartender in a cocktail bar. Bear with me. Bear with me. I know it's a bit early, but just bear with. And a customer walks in, and the customer says to you, I've got bad news. In fact, I've got really, really bad news. We're facing the gravest economic crisis since the Second World War. That's what the customer says. And I say, as a bartender, you say, well, hang on, why? What's really happening? And the customer says, well, we've got 4 ingredients of this crisis. The first is, we've got a crisis of growth, a lack of growth. So we've got a growth crisis. The lowest growth forecasts for 70 years. The second crisis, at the same time, is we've got a tax crisis. We've got the highest taxes, also, for about 70 years. And then we've got another crisis, an inflation crisis, the highest inflation for 30 years plus. Anybody under the age of 40 has never seen this before. And then finally, just to cap it off, we've got a productivity crisis. Yes, apparently, although there's a labour shortage, we've got the highest number at 5.3 million people on out-of-work benefits of the working age population. That's 1 in 8. All those 4 things together, the customer says to the bartender, they've all come together at one moment, and that creates the gravest economic crisis since World War II. I don't think we've ever seen these 4 things come together, even in the 1970s, the depths of the 70s. I don't think this combination was so serious at the same time. Still, we need to be optimistic, and so we need to say, well, you're in a cocktail bar. What cocktails have you got to try and deal with this crisis, or at least in some way provide a bit of respite, some form of joy, some form of cure? And so you're the bartender, and you've got 2 cocktails on the menu. The first cocktail, well, there's 2. There's one that's bubbling with good news, and there's another cocktail that is laced with bad taste. It's actually pretty revolting. So let's look at them, actually. The one that's not very attractive, that's not very tasty, I'm calling the Rishi Corbyn cocktail. And the ingredients of this cocktail are as follows. A serious dose of higher personal taxes, a dash of higher corporate taxes, and then a splash of massive government spending, and then stirred with a bit of ice, but also the creation of a culture of subsidy, a culture of handouts and dependency, as though the government should do everything for you. And I think that that is a pretty unattractive, not a very tasty cocktail. And the truth is, that cocktail will not lead to respite from the problem. What it will lead towards is lower growth. What it will lead towards is ever higher inflation with ever higher energy bills. And also, if you create a sense of a complete culture of dependency, you create a disincentive to work. So I want your thoughts. Do you like the sound of that cocktail? Is that tasty? Or would you prefer the next cocktail, the good news cocktail? Because actually, there is a cure to this problem, this crisis. I think there's a delicious cocktail of ingredients out there that would provide a really tasty alternative. Now, I'm calling this cocktail, and I admit it's a bit cheesy, I'm calling it the Tasty Tice cocktail, which goes as follows. The first ingredient is that you cut taxes hard for the lowest paid by increasing personal tax threshold at which you pay any tax from 12.5 grand to £20,000. That's an extra 30 quid a week, give or take, in everybody's pocket. So that's lowering taxes. You then spice up the cocktail as follows. You cut VAT on fuel duty by 20p a litre. And then you add a few more tax cuts. And the great thing about tax cuts on consumer goods is it means lower prices. So the next thing is we get rid of VAT on energy bills. And the next thing, we get rid of these environmental levies on all our electricity bills. Those things alone save everyone hundreds and hundreds of pounds every single year. These are tasty tax cuts. And then we round off the cocktail with a bit of ice and a good splash and stirring of a VAT cut on all other goods from 20% to 18%. Now, yes, it's fair to say this cocktail, this tasty Tice cocktail, is a bit more expensive than the Rishi Corbyn cocktail. But the result is much, much more attractive. The result is you get higher growth. We calculate by over 0.5% every single year. In the first year alone, you'd get higher inflation. Sorry, you'd get lower inflation. I've got in the Rishi Corbyn mode. You get lower inflation by about 4% in that first year. And crucially, you increase the incentive to work. So we start to get people back out of that list of out-of-work benefits back into work. And the way that you pay for this much tastier cocktail is that you cut unnecessary government spending. In the same way, as we're all looking to save a few quid in our household budgets, many people are saying I need to save 5 quid in every 100. Well, if the government did the same, and I'll be talking about it shortly after the break, then the government could save, if they did 5%, that's over 50 billion a year. So the cost of my cocktail, the annual cost, at about 74 billion, most of that can be paid by government spending savings. That's the opportunity. That's the tasty cocktail that I believe lies ahead. And I want your thoughts. What sort of cocktail would you want the bartender to make for you? Do you want the tasty Tice cocktail? Or do you want the Rishi Corbyn cocktail of gloom? I know which one I want. I'm pretty certain I know which one would be much more successful in dealing with the problems that we face today, which were the same problems we faced 50 years ago in the 1970s. And we'll be talking about that throughout the show. But I want your thoughts, your views, as ever. But to summarise, you've got two cocktails. You've got the Rishi Corbyn cocktail, or you've got the tasty Tice cocktail of tax cuts, lower prices, higher growth, lower inflation. And with that, here endeth my Sunday sermon.